begins. Okay. My goal is that by the end of our time here together today, you're going to feel confident. You're going to feel like you're in control of this. And bonus, maybe you'll even feel excited about running stations. That would be the icing on the cake. So what you're going to learn today is I'm going to go over just some realistic station activity ideas, like what are students actually doing in stations? What are those ideas? Like, what are they actually doing? We're going to talk about the logistics as far as getting started with stations, like the timing and the student groups and what does my classroom like physically look like. We'll go into that. We're going to talk about the big piece of student accountability because they're working in small groups, they're working in stations, and what about the behavior and what about the grading and how do I hold them accountable to their work without me taking home a bunch of work every night to grade? And of course, to wrap it all up, we'll have to talk about how to front load our students, how to kind of train our students ahead of time, because we're not just going to put everybody in groups and go. We've got to do some front loading first. So I'll share some ideas on that for you too. Obviously, there are some valid concerns about stations. These are things that I struggled with as well before I really got the flow going. And now I love stations. I can't imagine running my classroom without them. But in the chat, give me a 1, 2, 3, or 4 for what the biggest problem, concern, issue, setback is for you personally when it comes to setting up and running stations. I mean, you could say 1, 2, 3, 4 if you want to, but just take a second, read through this. Which one is maybe top of mind for you? That's the biggest issue for you. Okay, I've got some responses coming in. Yeah, I mean, they're valid concerns. Yes. I get it. Yeah. Okay. So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to touch on all of these tonight, okay? We're going to be realistic about it. And ultimately the goal is that we want our students actively engaged. That's why we're doing stations. We're doing stations in the classroom because that gives more students a chance to be actively engaged in the learning process versus in a whole class setting. Now, hold on, because I am not anti whole class direct instruction. There's definitely a time and a place to do it. And when we talk about the logistics of stations, I'll actually show you where and how and when I do whole class direct instruction. I'm not saying do all stations and never direct teach, never do whole class. Absolutely not. You'll see in a weekly schedule scenario that I set up for you where I do whole class direct instruction. But the likelihood of your students being more like hands-on, engaged, they're the ones doing the reading, writing, speaking, and listening. It's going to happen more in stations as long as we set them up correctly. And that's what I'm here to show you tonight. Okay. Definitely want them actively engaged because ultimately we as the teacher, we want to be able to sit down at, some kind of a teacher table or some kind of a setup in the classroom. We want to be able to have our own students working with us too. We want to be able to differentiate and do intervention and extend. And we want to have our own small group of students for stations as well. But we can't do that if we're constantly being interrupted by all the other student groups and what's going on in the classroom. So we'll touch on all that too. Okay, so let's just get this part out of the way so that as we go into the logistics of running stations, you already kind of know in the back of your mind what some of those realistic station type activities can actually be. So here's just kind of an overview, okay? The main thing is that stations can be anything that you have already done in the classroom. So if you've already been doing, say, annotations in the classroom, then you can put annotations like that can be a station activity. You can repurpose whole class assignments into station materials. I will show you examples of how to do that so you're not recreating the wheel. You could have revising, editing, proofreading activities as a station. I'll show you a very specific image and example of what that can look like. You can have a whole technology station, like maybe one of your stations is technologies. Maybe students are on their Chromebooks. Maybe they have a selection of pre-approved choices that they can choose from for the technology station time. You might even have stations that are more geared towards like makeup work or for students who have been absent or do-over type activities. And obviously, your teacher table, when we get to that point, your teacher table is a station as well. So stations ultimately are materials and activities that are the types of things you've already done in class. In other words, they're not brand new types of assignments that students have never seen before. Like we're not going to throw, in a positive lesson in grammar at students in a station when we've never talked about it before, when we've never done grammar in a station before. So think about the things that you've done in class so far this year where you're like, okay, that type of activity, yeah, my students have seen that before. Okay, that could become part of a station. Okay. So stations can be any of these types of things. There are 7 ideas listed here. Does that mean you're going to have 7 stations in your classroom all at once? Nope, because that is not realistic. So I will show you how to condense this and make it very realistic for you and for your students. So maybe you have an activity that looks like this. Maybe this is, an annotation activity. This is the type of thing you've done in class before. That could be repurposed into a station. This revising editing, let me just say, if this looks like the type of rubric that you have or that you've used before, and if you're thinking, Laura, if I put that handout in a station, my students would, it's so many words, it's so much, they're not going to do anything with it. Here's a quick tip that I love to do with rubrics. If you're thinking, yeah, I'd love to have a revising editing set of stations, but how are they going to do anything? Okay, my biggest tip is if you have a rubric that looks like this, look at the rubric horizontally. You have content going all the way across with the point values, right? You have characterization going all the way across, organization, conventions, neatness, right? So don't give this whole entire handout to your students. Cut them across in strips so that content all the way across, that's one station. Like the only thing that students in that revising editing station are looking at is just the content piece going all the way across, right? That's all they're working with. Another station in your classroom might be just the characterization piece. Another station might be just the organization piece. And perhaps you have stations going like maybe every 15 minutes, a little timer goes off and students get up, they move to the next station. Or maybe your students stay seated because they can't handle getting up and moving around. And then maybe like you just move the materials. But like that right there is one of my biggest tips for modifying or for repurposing what would normally be a whole class activity. You can take something that looks like this, cut it down, like physically cut it down into strips so that students are only looking at that one component. And I will tell you, the quality of work that you get in doing that is infinitely higher than if you just give students this whole entire rubric and tell them to figure out the point value system and grade, score each other's grade, not grade for real, but you know how we want students to do peer editing. Using that kind of that strip method, so much better. So that's a tip there for what a revising editing station might look like. If you have a rubric and you're thinking, how could I repurpose a rubric and like have stations? There you go. There's 5 stations right there because there are 5 parts to that rubric. Okay, so that's an idea. You could have a reader response station. This is a set of task cards. You can physically cut them up and students can use this to respond. They can use this to discuss in their stations. You know where this came from? This came from a really boring looking worksheet that I had that had a list of 15 questions on it, just right down the page, 15 questions. A worksheet looked terrible. I took the exact same questions and just turned them into what looked like task cards, cut them out. And now students have cards that they can go through and they can use to discuss. So a reader response station, that's another way that you can take what would be just like a normal whole class activity and make it much more interactive without a whole lot of work, really. You can have a vocabulary station, right? We never have enough time to spend on vocabulary. So think about aspects of vocabulary that you wish you had more time for in class. It could be words in context related to something that you're reading that week. It could even be like spelling rules. I mean, that's, at our point in the middle school journey, like, do you even have spelling in your standards anymore? Where we are, we don't. And I wish we did because they need it. But I like to sometimes sneak in some spelling rules, activities, and lessons into my vocabulary station. So think about how you can use vocabulary as part of your stations. That's another idea. Okay. you can grab a screenshot of this if you want to, but you are getting all of the image that we're going over here tonight. Maybe you have a technology station. And so when I mentioned earlier that I like to have my students, select from a pre-approved, option like choice board of websites or apps that they're allowed to use when it's their turn to be in the so-called technology station and get their Chromebooks out. These are the types of activities I like to have them do. Typing club. Typing club is a great one. It's free because our students can use their thumbs and they can swipe all day long, but to watch them try to type something out, they don't type the way that we do. At least mine don't. Maybe yours do. Even something like typing club to help them, communicate better when it comes to typing out answers. So you could have technology as a station in your classroom, and maybe this is their choice board. These are things that they could choose from. You probably have more apps and websites. These are just my examples, but you could create kind of a whole collection, and then that collection just stays the same. And so when it's, time for technology, there's nothing else you need. You don't really need to prep anything because students have whatever the designated station time is to go through some of these activities on their own of their choice. So that's an option. I call this one stations, even though it's not, because independent station sounds like a oxymoron, but it's just the point that when you're running stations in your classroom, not every student needs to even be in a station. Do you ever have students who come in and things are happening? I don't know what happened between classes. I don't know what happened at home, but this student walked in the door and this is like not happening today. Y'all, not every student has to be in a station every time. So I'm referring to this as a station, but it's just for lack of a better word. You may have a few students in class who are not in a station. That's fine. Maybe there's a behavior issue. Maybe it's just a learning style preference, right? Maybe you have a student who completed all their work. They're working quickly at a kind of a different level than everybody else. Maybe they're going to do some independent reading. It's fine. You do not have to have every student in a station every day. Don't have to. Don't force it if it's just not going to work. And then finally, the teacher station. That's a type of station. That's where you're sitting down with a group of students for a very particular purpose. More on that later. But for right now, I just wanted to, spend a little bit of time diving into what the types of stations are and what the types of activities can be in a station. So here's the thing though. Regardless of the type of station, right? Whether it's an annotation station, whether it's one of the revising editing ones, whether it's a vocabulary or a reader response, we're going to introduce stations one at a time, just one at a time, meaning we're not going to put students in stations tomorrow and give them 7 different things, right? We're not going to have 7 different groups in our classroom and each group is doing something completely different. That is chaos. We have to front load our students ahead of time. Okay, so we're going to introduce the type of station just one at a time. Here's a visual. This totally relates to the logistics of getting started with stations. This is what it'll look like. Oops, sorry. This is what it'll look like. When you're getting started with stations, put everybody in their groups. Okay, this is a class of 30. We've got 5 students per group, class of 30, fairly large class, right? This is the teacher. Teacher's kind of, right here. There are no students at the teacher station yet. Every station in the classroom is doing the same activity. So you might think, well, Laura, that's just small group work. Those aren't stations. But that's the point. When we're getting started with stations, it's not even about the actual activity. It's about like the students working in stations. It's about the quality of their work. It's about the behavioral component. It's about getting students used to working together without your input as a teacher, because the next step is you ultimately want to be able to pull students to your teacher table so that you can provide that small group instruction that they need. And so if students are not working well together, if the behavior is off, if their work quality is low, if they constantly have questions, how are you ever going to be able to sit down with a group